A heavy fist hit Dale Miller's jaw, rattling his teeth. He stumbled back, the roar of the crowd at the county fair fading to a ringing silence. His knees buckled, sending him to the dusty ground beside the prize-winning hog pen. Above him, Hank Peterson, still clenching his fist, sneered. Some men just don't know when to walk away from another man's woman, do they, Miller? The blood tasted metallic in Dale's mouth. Dale Miller pushed open the screen door to the small house on Elm Street, the metal spring groaning a familiar protest. The evening sun, a flat orange disk, hung low over the cornfields stretching west of town. He dropped his lunch pail on the small table by the door, the clatter echoing in the quiet entryway. He worked hard at the lumber yard, hauling planks and cutting timber, and the exhaustion settled deep in his bones, a dull ache that seemed to be a permanent fixture these days. The house smelled like Sarah, sandalwood and cinnamon, a blend she favored for candles and sachets tucked into drawers. It was a smell that had always felt like home. He heard voices from the living room, a soft murmur at first, then distinct tones. Sarah's laugh, light and easy, floated to him. He figured it was her sister, Carol, visiting. Carol often came by after her shift at the diner, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to sit and talk for hours. Dale started to loosen his tie, tugging at the knot. He'd just walk in, say hello, then head straight for the shower. Then Sarah's voice sharpened, cutting through the pleasant hum of his thoughts. Dale just doesn't get it. Her words were clear, flat, utterly dismissive. The tie around Dale's neck felt suddenly too tight. He paused, one hand still on the knot, muscles in his back tensing. He wasn't sure why he stopped, but a coldness started to spread through him, despite the warmth of the evening. I can't stand him anymore. The words hit him with a physical force, knocking the air from his lungs. He froze in the hallway, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. The faint smell of sandalwood seemed to vanish. He felt suddenly heavy, rooted to the spot, listening. He tried to tell himself he'd misheard, that she was talking about something else, someone else, but the raw frustration in her voice was unmistakable. It's the little things, Carol, Sarah continued, her voice dropping, almost a whisper but still audible. The way he breathes when he sleeps, that soft whistle, the way he chews, mouth open sometimes. And the predictability, Carol. Every night, the same television show, the same questions about my day. It's like suffocating in a box of beige paint. A box of beige paint. The image solidified in Dale's mind, trapping him. He hadn't realized his life had become so mundane, so colorless, to the woman he shared it with. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat trying to deny the truth of her words. He wanted to shout, to burst into the room and demand explanations, but his voice felt lodged somewhere deep in his throat. I haven't loved him in years, Carol. I don't know how to leave. That was it, the final clean cut. It wasn't the breathing or the chewing or even the beige paint. It was simply a lack of love. His chest constricted, a cold, hard knot forming where his heart should be. He felt like a burden, a heavy weight she was carrying, a cage she longed to escape. The house, usually a place of comfort, now felt like a trap for both of them. Dale turned slowly, the movement stiff, deliberate. He walked past the coat rack, past the framed landscape print he'd always liked, and into the bedroom. The door opened without a sound. He crossed to the closet, pulled out a worn canvas duffel bag from the shelf, and dropped it onto the bed. His hands trembled as he started stuffing clothes inside. A few work shirts, a pair of jeans, a clean t-shirt. He didn't stop to fold anything. His gaze fell on their wedding photo on the dresser, a young Sarah in white lace, her arm linked through his. Both of them smiling, full of hope and a future that had clearly gone off course. He felt like the world's biggest fool. The smile on his face in the picture seemed to mock him, a relic from a different lifetime. As he walked back down the hall, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he heard Sarah's careless laughter drift from the living room again. The sound was like a physical blow, reminding him of how easily she seemed to dismiss the life they had built. He paused at the archway leading into the living room, taking a deep breath. He stepped inside. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, a teacup in her hand, facing Carol. Her smile was wide, full of the easy humor he had once cherished. It died on her face the moment she saw him, standing there with the duffel bag. Her eyes widened, her jaw slackening. "Dale?" She blinked, confused, the teacup rattling slightly in her hand. "What are you doing?" He held her gaze, a long moment of silence stretching between them, letting the heavy quiet reveal everything he now knew, everything he had heard. He didn't need to say more. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah." He turned then, walked past the silent Carol, past the familiar furniture that no longer felt like his, and out the front door. The screen door groaned shut behind him. He didn't look back. The cool night air hit Dale, a sudden sharp clarity after the stifling warmth of the house. He barely felt it. His mind was a blur, a chaotic swirl of Sarah's words, the memory of her dying smile, the beige paint, the sudden vast emptiness where his life had been just minutes before. The duffel bag felt heavy on his shoulder, a physical manifestation of his sudden homelessness. He walked to his old pickup truck, the familiar blue paint dulled by years of sun and dust. The door opened with a familiar squeak. He tossed the duffel bag onto the passenger seat, then slid behind the wheel. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the worn leather rough beneath his fingers. He stared out at the quiet street, at the other houses, dark and sleeping, each holding its own secrets. "I haven't loved him in years. I don't know how to leave." Her words echoed, a relentless hammer against the fragile walls of his composure. 8 years. 8 years of mornings, of dinners, of shared silences and occasional laughter. 8 years reduced to that one stark sentence. An unbearable hollow opened inside him, a vast, echoing cave where certainty used to be. He questioned everything, every shared glance, every soft touch, every plan they had ever made. Had it all been a lie? A performance for his benefit? He couldn't go to Dave and Mary, their closest friends. They were their friends, mutual territory, and besides, he couldn't face their questions, their pity. His parents lived 2 states away, too far to show up on their doorstep in the middle of the night. Too far to explain this raw, sudden break. A hotel. The thought crossed his mind, then he dismissed it. A hotel would make it too real, too official. He wasn't ready for official. So he drove, aimlessly. The truck rumbled onto the empty roads that wound through the flat Midwestern landscape. Streetlights cast long, ghostly shadows ahead of him, then behind as he passed. Fields of dormant cornstalks stretched out on either side, dark and silent under the moon. He drove for what felt like hours, the hum of the engine a dull counterpoint to the racing thoughts in his head. He replayed his marriage, sifting through the years, searching for the cracks he'd been too blind to see. The way Sarah had started turning away from him in bed, just a slight shift, but enough to create a distance. Her sighs, quiet, almost imperceptible, when he suggested their usual Saturday night movie. Her phone always in her hand, her thumb scrolling, a small, glowing screen she protected from his view. He'd dismissed it all, explained it away as stress, as tiredness, as simply the way things were after years together. He'd been comfortable, complacent, and now he was paying for it. Eventually, without conscious thought, he found himself pulling into an empty parking lot near the harbor. The town dock was deserted, the night air thick with the scent of lake water and distant diesel. He killed the engine. His chest heaved, a tight knot of confusion and pain churning inside him. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore was an unsettling contrast to his inner chaos. Each gentle slap of water against concrete seemed to mock his turmoil. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel, the cool plastic pressing against his skin. This was it. Here, in the quiet darkness, he finally let himself feel it all. The betrayal, sharp and unexpected. The heartbreak, a deep, aching void. The humiliation, a burning shame that spread from his gut to his face. He wanted to believe it was salvageable, that this was just a bad fight, a misunderstanding that could be fixed. But her words, "I haven't loved him in years," weren't spoken in anger. They were a statement of fact, cold and clear. He hadn't just lost her tonight. He'd lost her long ago, slowly, incrementally, while he was too busy living his beige life to even notice. His phone vibrated on the passenger seat, startling him. He looked at the screen. Sarah. Her name glowed, stark white against the dark display. He stared at it for a long minute, watching it buzz again, then again. What could she possibly want to say? He picked it up, his thumb hovering over the answer button. He inhaled slowly, then pressed it. Dale? Her voice was hesitant, thin with uncertainty. Where are you? He didn't answer right away. He just listened to the faint static on the line, the sound of her breath. I heard you, he said quietly, his voice rough. A pause, a beat of silence. What? Her voice was sharper now, a hint of panic underneath the question. I heard you, Sarah. I heard everything. Another silence, longer this time, filled with the unspoken truths that now hung between them. Then a quick, desperate intake of breath. Dale, I was just upset. I didn't mean it. She was trying to deny it, trying to pull back, to rebuild the wall. He cut her off, his voice firm, unwavering. Don't lie to me. He ended the call, the click of the disconnect final. The phone felt heavy in his hand. He had loved a woman who didn't love him back. The truth, cold and unyielding, settled over to him, heavier than any duffel bag. Dale didn't sleep. He sat in his truck, parked at the edge of the harbor lot, staring out at the dark expanse of the lake. It was too vast to be an ocean, but in the moonless night it felt just as deep, just as indifferent. The rhythmic wash of the waves against the shore continued, a slow, insistent heartbeat that seemed to pull at something inside him. He was bracing for impact, though the impact had already come. The slow unraveling was what remained. His phone lit up again on the passenger seat, a beacon of unwanted attention in the silent cab. 7 missed calls, 3 texts, all from Sarah. He picked it up, his thumb running over the smooth glass. The first text was short, sharp. Where are you? Sent immediately after he hung up. The second, a few minutes later, held a note of desperation. Dale, come home, we need to talk. A small tremor went through him. For a moment, a flicker of the old hope, the old instinct to fix things. Then he read the third one, sent maybe half an hour ago. It made his stomach clench, a sour twist of anger and disbelief. You're being dramatic. Let's just be adults about this. Dramatic? He let out a bitter, choked laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet of the truck. He shook his head slowly, a grim realization settling in. She hadn't just stopped loving him. She had reduced their entire 8 years together, his entire world, to an inconvenience. A minor scene to be handled, a childish tantrum on his part. It was a cold, brutal assessment. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat, the soft thud absorbed by the duffel bag. He rubbed his face, feeling the stubble against his palm. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak pressing down on him, trying to drag him into sleep. But sleep felt impossible, a betrayal of the churning thoughts, the fresh wounds. Every ignored warning sign, every distant touch, every quiet sigh Sarah had given over the past months now played like a silent film in his mind, clear and undeniable. He had been blind, willfully so, comfortable in the routine, the assumed security of their life. Yet a strange, numb calm began to settle over him, a desolate kind of peace. The worst had happened. The deception was out in the open. The foundation of his world had crumbled, and he had witnessed it. There was no more suspense, no more agonizing over what might be. Only acceptance remained. A cold, hard stone in his gut. The first hints of morning light began to creep over the horizon, painting the eastern sky in faint washes of gray and pale violet. The darkness was retreating slowly, reluctantly. He watched it, feeling the shift, the inevitable turning of the day. He knew he couldn't go back. Not to that apartment, with its sandalwood and cinnamon that now felt like a lie. Not to that life, built on a foundation of indifference he had been too afraid to see. Not anymore. The thought was liberating, even as it terrified him. He was adrift, unmoored, but also, finally, free of the pretense. He needed a plan, a place to land. He thought of his brother, Mike. Mike lived a few towns over, out near the state line, on a small farm he'd inherited from their uncle. He was a gruff man, mostly quiet, but solid, dependable. The thought of facing Mike, of explaining this mess, felt like another heavy weight settling on his shoulders. Mike would look at him with those steady, unblinking eyes, and Dale would have to lay it all bare. The humiliation of it. But the alternative, staying here broken in this parking lot, staring at the gray dawn with no direction, that was worse. Much worse. He couldn't afford to stay broken. He reached for the ignition. The old engine coughed once, then caught, rumbling to life. It was a new sound in the quiet morning, a definite decision. A new kind of resolve, fragile but present, began to form within him. It was a resolution to simply keep moving, one foot in front of the other, even if he didn't know where he was going. The sun rose higher, painting the horizon in bruised colors, deep purples, streaky reds, then a harsh, bright orange. It was a brutal beauty, mirroring the ragged landscape of his own soul. He put the truck in gear and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, heading west, away from the rising sun. Away from everything. Dale drove out of the harbor lot, the rising sun now a harsh glare in his rearview mirror. He set the truck heading west, towards the state line, towards Mike. The roads were quiet, the morning traffic not yet fully begun. The drive gave him time to allow the full weight of what had happened to sink in, even as a small part of him clung to the idea that it was all a bad dream. He pulled over just outside of Maple Creek, the next town over, and picked up his phone. He scrolled to Mike's number, his thumb hovering. It was early, but Mike was always an early riser, up with the sun to tend to his small patch of land. He dialed. "Yeah?" Mike's voice was rough with sleep, but steady. "Mike, it's Dale." His own voice was hoarse, thick with a night of no sleep and too much thought. I need a place to crash for a bit." He kept it vague, knowing Mike would understand. A pause, just a beat. "Course you can stay, Dale. Long as you need. Place is always open." "You on your way?" "Yeah, just leaving town now." "All right, I'll put the coffee on it. We'll figure it out." Mike's voice was calm, steady, a familiar anchor in the storm that had become Dale's life. It was a simple offer without judgment, and it settled something in Dale's chest. A small, fragile comfort. He arrived at Mike's modest farmhouse, just as the sun cleared the horizon, painting the fields in a pale, golden light. The old white paint on the house was peeling in places. The porch sagged slightly, but it was familiar. This was where he and Mike had spent summers as kids, visiting their uncle. This was solid. Mike met him at the door, a tall, lean figure with a worn flannel shirt and the lines of a life lived outdoors etched around his eyes. He just nodded, took the duffel bag from Dale's hand, and motioned him inside. The smell of coffee was already brewing, strong and black. Mike poured 2 mugs, then settled them both at the scarred oak kitchen table. No questions, not yet. Just a mug of hot coffee in his hands. Dale looked at his brother, then down at the swirling black liquid. The words came out slowly at first, then in a rush, a torrent of betrayal and confusion. He recounted the evening, Sarah's words, the beige paint, "I haven't loved him in years." Mike just listened, his expression unreadable, occasionally taking a slow sip of coffee. When Dale finished, the kitchen was silent, save for the hum of the old refrigerator. Mike reached across the table, placed a large, calloused hand on Dale's shoulder. "Damn, Dale. I'm sorry, brother." His voice was low, genuine. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was something deeper, a shared understanding of pain. They sat there for a long time, the quiet understanding a balm. Dale felt a sliver of relief, a moment of not being utterly alone in this vast, sudden emptiness. His world had ended, but there was still family, still a place to go. "Bathroom's through there," Mike said, gesturing with his chin. "Towels are fresh." Dale nodded, grateful for the simple direction. He took a shower, letting the hot water sluice over his skin, trying to wash away the chill that had settled deep in his bones. He scrubbed hard, as if he could scrub away the past 24 hours. He came out wrapped in a thick towel. Mike had left a clean shirt and a pair of jeans on the bed in the spare room. Dale pulled on the shirt, the cotton smelling of fresh laundry, clean and sharp, a stark contrast to the sandalwood and cinnamon of his old life. Back in the kitchen, Mike was refilling their mugs. "So," he began, his voice soft. "What do you need, Dale? What's next?" Dale took a slow sip of coffee. The heat felt good against his throat. "I gotta figure out what's mine," he murmured, the words tasting foreign, alien. The enormity of it, separating a life built over 8 years, was just beginning to truly dawn on him. The shared home, the furniture, the car, the joint accounts, the little things that had woven their two lives so intricately together. It felt like trying to untangle 100 threads, each one painful to pull. Mike nodded. That's a process. Take your time, Dale. Don't rush into anything. We'll face it when you're ready. Dale just nodded, unable to articulate the sudden exhaustion that pressed down on him. Mike showed him to the spare room, a small, neat space with an old quilt on the bed. He closed the door behind him. Dale lay down, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The quiet hum of the country night, the distant crickets, the rustle of leaves replaced the imagined sounds of Sarah's betrayal. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a tentative peace. He closed his eyes. After 3 days at Mike's, the initial shock had begun to recede, replaced by a hollow ache. Dale knew he couldn't live out of a single duffel bag. He needed more clothes, important papers, some of the few personal items that actually felt like his. He had to go back to the apartment. He called Sarah. Her voice, when she answered, was strained, thin. She agreed to be out of the apartment when he came, promised him space. He hung up, feeling a knot of dread in his stomach. He drove the half-hour back to Elm Street, the silence of the truck amplifying his unease. He pulled up to the curb. Her car was in the driveway. She hadn't left. The apartment door was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly. The familiar scent of sandalwood and cinnamon hit him, thick and cloying. The place felt alien, wrong, filled with her presence and the ghost of their life together. Sarah was standing in the living room near the window, her back to him. She turned slowly when she heard him, her eyes red-rimmed. "Dale," she began, her voice pleading, a fragile thread. "Please let me explain. It wasn't what you thought. I was just frustrated. You know how I get." He stood in the entryway, the duffel bag already feeling heavy in his hand, a symbol of his temporary status. He looked around the room at the beige walls, the sofa where they had spent so many quiet evenings, the small table where they ate dinner. None of it felt real. Frustration? His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a thin shield against the resurfacing pain. "Sarah, I heard you say you hadn't loved me in years. That's not frustration." Her composure began to crumble. Her shoulders slumped. She hugged herself, looking down at the carpet. There's someone else," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Not like that, not really, just a friend, an emotional connection." A new wave of nausea hit Dale, sharper than before. A friend. And the casualness of the word, the way she downplayed it, twisted something inside him. It wasn't just about his predictability, his chewing, his breathing. It was another person. The details solidified the betrayal, made it concrete, real. "Is he why you feel alive, Sarah?" The question was a spear, cutting through the thin veil of her excuses. He didn't want to know the answer, but he had to ask. She couldn't meet his eyes. She shook her head, a small, choked sound escaping her. I felt trapped, Dale. I wanted more. I wasn't happy." Her words hung in the air, a familiar refrain. He didn't respond. He simply walked past her, into the bedroom. He systematically began to gather his belongings, pulling out more clothes, stuffing them into a larger travel bag he found in the back of the closet. He ignored her attempts to engage, to justify, to plead. He moved with a cold efficiency, picking up his old college textbooks, a of personal documents, a few worn t-shirts. He was dismantling his half of a life, piece by painful piece. In the bottom of a dresser drawer, he found a small, dusty shoebox. Inside were old photographs, pictures of them hiking in the state park, laughing at a barbecue with friends, their wedding day. Young, hopeful faces. He stared at them for a long moment, then quietly closed the box and left it where it was. They were hers now, memories he couldn't take with him. He zipped up the second bag. This was it. Everything he truly needed, outside of Mike's generosity, was now packed. He turned, the two bags heavy in his hands. Sarah was still standing in the living room, watching him, her face streaked with tears. "Don't bother calling, Sarah," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, of anything but exhaustion. He wasn't angry, not yet, just empty. He had nothing left to say. He walked past her, out the front door, leaving the sandalwood and cinnamon, the beige paint, and the ghostly laughter behind. The screen door clicked shut. This time, the apartment felt truly like a tomb for his past. The drive back to Mike's was silent, punctuated by a new, sharper ache of anger. The friend. It wasn't just about him being dull or predictable. It was about her seeking something, someone else. The truth was colder, harder. It was never just about him. He understood now that some choices come at a far greater cost than we ever imagined. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Word of Dale and Sarah's separation spread quickly through their small circle of mutual friends. In a town like theirs, news traveled faster than the river in a spring thaw. Some friends offered hesitant support, calls that started with, "I'm so sorry, Dale," and ended with awkward silences. Some tried to mediate, suggesting they talk things out, clearly uncomfortable with the messiness of it all. Most, though, were simply avoidant, their eyes darting away in the grocery store aisle, their conversations suddenly hushed when he approached. Dale felt the isolation, the quiet judgment, a sense that he had broken some unspoken social contract. But he also felt a strange, quiet liberation from the charade. The effort of pretending, of smiling and nodding, was gone. Sarah, it became clear, was not maintaining silence. Through veiled comments from well-meaning friends and the occasional pointed text message he received, Dale learned she had started her own campaign. She painted him as the uncommunicative, cold husband, the one who had just up and left without a word, abandoning her. She was the victim, caught in a beige box he had created. Dale, however, refused to badmouth her. When friends asked carefully what had happened, he just shrugged. It wasn't working anymore. He offered no details, no accusations. He let her words hang in the air, knowing the truth would eventually reveal itself, or perhaps it wouldn't. Either way, he wouldn't be the one to drag their private grief into public mud. His stoic silence was his only defense, his only dignity. Mike, ever practical, had set him up with a lawyer, Brenda. She was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a clear, direct way of speaking. Her office was in the next town over, in a brick building above the bank. He sat across from her, explaining the situation, keeping his voice steady. Brenda outlined the difficult path ahead, the division of assets, the apartment, the shared car, the bank accounts. Every aspect of the life he and Sarah had built together would have to be unraveled, examined, and divided. It sounded like an archaeological dig, unearthing every shard of their shared history. Meanwhile, Sarah's calls and texts became more frequent, a rising tide of emotion. They escalated from please, Dale, let's just talk, to accusations. You're being cruel, just leaving me like this. And then to outright guilt trips. You're tearing our life apart, Dale, she texted one evening, the words stark white on his phone screen. He just stared at it, felt nothing but a dull ache. She was right in a way. He was tearing their life apart, but it had already been torn, hadn't it? He was just finally acknowledging the rip. One Saturday, Dale drove into town with Mike to pick up some feed for the chickens. He was walking out of the local grocery store, a bag of staples in his hand, when he saw her. Sarah. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a smile wider and more genuine than he'd seen on her face in years. And beside her, pushing the cart, was the friend, a man he vaguely recognized from the lumberyard, a new hire in the sales department. Mark, he thought his name was. The sight was a dull thud, not a shock. He had expected it, known it, since the night he'd overheard her. But seeing them together, the casual intimacy of their shared laughter, was a different kind of truth. It was just another piece of the puzzle clicking into place, the final, undeniable proof. He watched them for a moment, then turned and walked to Mike's truck, the grocery bag heavy in his hand. He focused on work. At the lumberyard, he threw himself into the physical labor, letting the sweat and the exhaustion dull the sharper edges of his pain. He started rebuilding routines, early mornings with Mike, helping with chores on the farm, quiet evenings reading a borrowed book. He found small comforts in the mundane, the predictability he had once been accused of. He still felt the weight of his old life, a phantom limb that ached with the memory of what was lost. But underneath it, a new, quieter determination began to take root. His initial shock, the raw humiliation, the sense of being cast adrift, slowly hardened into resolve. Not a resolve for revenge, not a desire to hurt Sarah back, but a resolve for a clean break, for fair terms, for dignity. He knew he had to see this through, no matter how messy it got, for his own peace, for his own future. After a few weeks at Mike's, Dale found a small, no-frills apartment in the next town over, closer to his job at the lumberyard. It was on the second floor of an old brick building with peeling paint in the hallway and a faint smell of stale cigarette smoke. But it was his. The living room was sparse, just a second-hand couch and a small coffee table he'd picked up from a garage sale. The bedroom had a mattress on the floor and a single lamp. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. He started buying basic furniture, slowly, making it a home. He threw himself into work, picking up extra shifts whenever they were available. The physical labor was a welcome distraction, a way to exhaust his body so his mind would be too tired to dwell on the past. Stacking lumber, loading trucks, the rhythm of it all provided a strange kind of comfort. The pain was a dull throb now, always there, a low hum beneath the surface, but less consuming than it had been. He could function, could go through the motions of his day without feeling like the world was constantly collapsing around him. Brenda, his lawyer, moved forward with the divorce proceedings. As expected, Sarah's side was contentious. She fought over every little thing, from the old kitchen table to a set of inherited teacups, even items Dale had no sentimental attachment to. It felt like spite, or perhaps a desperate attempt to exert some control over the situation, or maybe even regret. Dale, however, maintained his quiet resolve. He only fought for what was truly fair and necessary, letting Brenda handle the details, trusting her judgment. He wanted a clean break, not a protracted battle over trinkets. He started going to the gym in the evenings, a small place above the hardware store. The grunts of the other men, the clang of weights, the burn in his muscles, it all provided a new outlet for the residual anger and frustration that still simmered within him. He found a strange kind of peace in pushing his body to its limits, the physical strain overriding the emotional one. He had brief, polite conversations with some mutual friends he ran into at the grocery store or the gas station. He didn't slander Sarah. He didn't need to. He just stated simple facts, corrected small inaccuracies in her narrative without overtly accusing her. "I didn't just leave without a word," he might say quietly. "We had our issues for a while." He let the subtext do its work, allowing them to draw their own conclusions. One afternoon, his phone rang. It was Carol, Sarah's sister. He hadn't spoken to her since that night. Her voice was hesitant at first, then firm. "Dale, I needed to call. I heard everything from Sarah, of course, but I just wanted you to know, I told her. I told her she was messing up. What she was doing was wrong." Her voice was heavy with sorrow, a deep disappointment in her own sister. This confirmation, coming from Carol, surprisingly brought a measure of clarity, not vindication. It wasn't about being right, it was about understanding. It allowed him to finally see Sarah's choices not as a personal attack on him, but as her own misguided attempts to find happiness. Her choices were her own burden to carry, not his. He began to envision a future without Sarah, a future where he could build something authentic, something based on honesty and his own quiet strength. The scars were still fresh, still tender, but the foundation of this new life, sparse and simple as it was, felt stronger, more real. He was no longer just adrift. He was rebuilding. The divorce was finalized in early autumn, a quiet ceremony in Brenda's office, paper signed, seal stamped. It was an almost anticlimactic end to 8 years of marriage, a culmination of months of tedious, draining legal work. Sarah got less than she expected. Her contentious behavior during negotiations, her insistence on fighting over sentimental items, had not swayed the court in her favor. Dale felt no triumph, no elation, only a deep weariness, like he'd run a marathon he hadn't chosen to enter, and finally, a sense of closure. The chapter was officially, irrevocably closed. Rumors, as always, floated through their small town. He heard through a mutual acquaintance that Sarah's relationship with the friend, Mark, hadn't lasted, or perhaps it had become complicated. Details were vague, but the underlying message was clear. Her new beginning hadn't been the perfect escape she'd envisioned. She faced social consequences too, the quiet disapproval from those who knew both of them. People didn't shout, didn't confront. They simply stopped inviting her to certain gatherings. Their smiles grew a little thinner, their greetings a little less warm. Dale realized she had paid a price after all, not the kind he had sought, not some grand theatrical revenge, but the natural consequence of her choices, playing out in the quiet hum of their small community. It wasn't satisfying, not in a cruel way, but it was fair. He continued to rebuild his life, piece by piece. His apartment, though still modest, felt more like a home now, filled with his own quiet rhythms. He'd bought a comfortable armchair, a sturdy wooden desk. He still threw himself into work at the lumberyard, but it was no longer just a distraction. It was a foundation. He found joy in simple things, the smell of fresh-cut wood, a good book in the evenings, the quiet contentment of a meal cooked just for himself. He visited Mike regularly. His brother's quiet counsel, the shared silence over a cup of coffee on the farmhouse porch, became a cornerstone of his new routine. Family, genuine connection. That was what truly mattered. One brisk Saturday afternoon, he was at the hardware store picking up some paint for his new kitchen. He turned a corner and saw her. Sarah, she was looking at a display of garden tools, her back to him. Then she turned and their eyes met across the crowded aisle. For a brief moment, the noise of the store faded. There was no anger in him, no hatred, not anymore. Just a fleeting recognition of a shared, painful past. He saw something in her eyes too, perhaps regret, perhaps weariness, he couldn't be sure. He just nodded slightly, a gesture that was neither greeting nor condemnation, simply an acknowledgement. Then he turned, pushed his cart past a display of bolts, and walked away with a sense of quiet peace. The heartbreak remained a part of his story, a scar etched into his soul, but it no longer defined him. He understood now that the deepest revenge isn't grand gestures, isn't seeing someone else suffer, but simply living well, living honestly, building something new and true from the wreckage. He understood the true meaning of morality not as a set of rules, but as the inevitable consequences embedded in the choices people made and the prices, both visible and invisible, that were ultimately paid. Dale Miller, standing on his own 2 feet, scarred but whole, was finally ready for whatever came next. Dale had faced the cold truth, weathered the storm of betrayal, and walked through the long, dark night of his marriage's end. He learned that some wounds heal slowly, leaving behind a subtle ache, a reminder of where he'd been. But he also learned the resilience of the human spirit, the quiet strength found in rebuilding, in genuine connection, and in simply moving forward with integrity. His journey wasn't about vengeance or victory. It was about reclaiming his own sense of self, understanding that sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set you free. He had paid his price in pain and loss, but he had emerged with a hard-won peace, a quiet wisdom, and a future entirely his own. I had faced the cold truth, weathered the storm of betrayal, and walked through the long, dark night of my marriage's end with Vanessa. The divorce was done, a pile of papers confirming what I already knew. A life dismantled. I learned that some wounds heal slowly, leaving behind a subtle ache, a reminder of where I'd been. But I also learned the resilience of the human spirit, the quiet strength found in rebuilding, in genuine connection, and in simply moving forward with integrity. My journey wasn't about vengeance or victory. It was about reclaiming my own sense of self, understanding that sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set you free. I had paid my price in pain and loss, a cost I hadn't foreseen when I first heard her words, but I had emerged with a hard-won peace, a quiet wisdom, and a future entirely my own. I stood on solid ground now, scarred but whole, a stranger to the man who once suffocated in a box of beige paint. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt truly mine. I didn't need Vanessa to feel alive again. I was simply living on my own terms. The choices we make and the prices we pay always come back around. I knew that now, in the quiet aftermath.